Welcome to the Mindful CIO podcast. This season, we focus on building trust, culture, and capability for responsible AI adoption. Together, we will explore what it takes for CIOs and technology leaders to implement AI in a way that balances speed with governance, innovation with accountability, and performance with long-term value. If you are navigating the complexity of AI inside your organization, you are in the right place. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Mindful CIO podcast, building trust, culture, and capability for responsible AI adoption. Today, we are glad to speak with Paul Cooper. Paul is a consultant and researcher in digital health and specializes in researching and exploring how to lower barriers to entry for advanced digital tools such as AI. He uses Gen AI extensively in his professional career and writes and blogs on topics of ethics, trust, and digital equity. Paul, thank you so much for agreeing to have a conversation today.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Nathalie.
Great. So, Paul, your bio is very modest, very short, given that everything that you've been up to and the many projects that I know you have your fingers on to this day. Let's start maybe with a little bit of looking back of your career, over your career, and how did you arrive at working with AI today? So, what experience shaped Paul Cooper?
Well, Natalie, it's really funny when you look back on your career because I guess when I was going through it, I thought there was some discontinuity, so to speak. But in fact, when I look back now from this vantage point, I would say that there have been more like a series of different arcs that have all somehow culminated in this this work I'm currently very engrossed in the era of generative AI. But my journey really started. I had an early schoolboy, I guess, interest in AI and where that could possibly go. It was very early days in the early 70s. But that got me very interested in computing. But I was also very interested in biology. I loved all aspects to do with DNA and life and how the genetic code arose. So it was a toss-up between the computer science art angle in my life, and that wasn't really very formal back then at school. That at the university had only just started. So I went down a biochemistry path. Biochemistry was all about systems thinking and how one enzyme links to another and creates a cascading effect. And I loved that. So my pathway ended up in medical research. And what I found during that initial career journey was that I really wasn't as good a scientist as I thought I was going to be. I was interested in the field and I was very passionate about it. But in fact, you need to be very, very disciplined, I think, in your thinking and willing to just stick at one thing for a very long period of time to actually get outcomes. And that really wasn't my brain. My brain was very adept, I think, at making linkages between topics and things, but not necessarily for a long hunt on one pathway. So ultimately, I took that interest in the systems thinking and my science career as I had it at that point. So I got through and finished my PhD and did my postdoc. But I then really started again in the field of IT. And I thought I had thrown away my early career. So I thought I disappointed my parents. And my mother said to me, everything goes in circles. Your career will come back again in some fashion. And so I'll fast forward to that because what happened after that was I had a business and IT career after that in government first. And then after the government phase where I got my blooding, so to speak, in computing, mainframe computing systems and then mini computers, I started to work in a consulting firm. And that was, of course, then the era of the Macs and the PCs and networks and so on. And then I needed to reinvent myself after a period of time there because I felt that I was getting too technically constrained again. So again, too much deep dive into one topic. And out I went and reschooled at night classes for 2 years in organizational change. So a completely different topic. And that really opened up a whole lot of career dimensions for me. That opened up the dimensions of management, leadership, and understanding much more how to run workshops, how to facilitate, interview people, that sort of thing. And then after that, so that was 35 years in that space. In my firm, I think because I'd had this early health sort of experience, they said to me, well, why don't you set up our health division? And so I started to work in the health space. And that was, of course, all the early days of what was called then health informatics, but it's digital health now. So that was things like the Australia's health record, shared health record, the My Health Record as it's now known. And I really got into very early days in terms of supporting that. And the final career arc after I left that sort of consulting pathway was in tertiary education. So I was asked to set up a class for postgraduate students in digital health. And I did that since 2017 at Deakin University. And in all of that time, I started to integrate my early love of the biochemistry, the systems thinking, the computing side of it, the biological side, the health side. Everything started to come together exactly as my mother had predicted. So you should always listen to your mother. And that was a wonderful thing. And in that time, the AI systems had really matured. First with the machine learning side, but I'm not a deep dive machine learning person. That's very much the computer science pathway, but more the generative AI, where I started to use the systems as soon as they became available from initially ChatGPT and then a whole raft of other tools. So that was a long answer. I'm sorry, Nathalie, but it's been a strange career path. So it wasn't easy to give you the 10-second summary.
Oh, please don't apologize. It's fascinating, and I feel very privileged, Paul, to learn more about you because it's interesting to see I make the link there, talking about. I was reading some of the recommendations on your LinkedIn profile, and someone mentioned that's something that stayed with me, that Paul has this incredible ability to make complex systems simple, and which links to your point on systems thinking and your interest in biology kind of links to nature, which reminds me of how we met in person the first time, at the Merry Table Cafe in Brunswick
Mm,
East, through our friend Andrew Ogburn, that eventually we're going to listen to this, I guess. Hi, Andrew.
yes.
And another random point as well in your LinkedIn is your website, and your email, is the longboardfella.com, which I found really funny, so I'm assuming that you're a surfer as well, Paul, which has a link
Well,
to,
a,
that's a
a
whole other
late
different story.
a later in life surfer, but I am going down into the surf tomorrow morning, so I can say that the water is still important in my life. So being in touch with nature absolutely is a key part of my life. So I definitely wouldn't see myself as a straight sort of technical nerd, but and nothing wrong with that, by the way. Nerds do wonderful contribution to the world. But I do see myself as having a whole lot of things really in my head now that have come from different career arcs. And I make lots and lots of connections between lots of things that I bring to the engagements I have commercially. But also, I just like linking together people in different domains of life and helping to connect them because I've had career paths in these different directions that have really enriched my life, and I hope to pass that forward to other people and to share that those openings if I can make them for others.
Beautiful. And I have experienced that firsthand myself. So thank you for all the introductions that you already made to me. Yeah, I was thinking biology. We are going totally not as per plan, but I can help.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's great. What came to mind is cosmology, because I know that is an area of interest in space as well. And today, in preparation for the episode recording, you share with me, and I don't think we'll be able to go deep in there, but your, very, very early project, back in 72, when maybe I won't speak on your behalf. So I think that would be good to maybe touch on that, just to illustrate further your, the system thinking and how ahead of the curve you were in terms of, innovative thinking as well.
Well, you're building that up perhaps more than the 16-year-old brain was really capable of. But look, the early computers were really just coming out, the big mainframe systems and so on. But I had done my best at that sort of age of 15 and 16 to think about where could we go with these sort of things. And because I'm interested in biology, I was interested in how could that map to the human brain, and how could our human brains uh, give us more insights about smart ways to build these AI systems. And actually, I wrote an essay on that topic, which is fine. That was just a school essay. But perhaps more to the point, because I had a love of electronics and I had been doing a lot of building of different electronic things since I was about 12. Parents gave me a soldering iron and all that stuff. So I decided I would try to build something, and I built this very, very early learning system that could control a tape recorder. And the idea of that was that I would have a set of pre-recorded answers on the tape recorder, and depending on what questions you asked the thing, it would click through to the different parts of the tape and actually provide the answers. And I submitted that for a sort of science talent search, and I got a modest award out of that. But what it really taught me was, number one, my imagination was way bigger than what I could practically achieve. So that was just that was really, really hard. The second thing I learned from it was that everybody was just experimenting. There was no pathways for any of this stuff. And when I just resurfaced that essay, I only just found it just this year. My mother had kept it in some old papers, and I dug it out. And actually, I put it into Notebook LM from Google, and I shared it with Nathalie. And one of the things that it really pulled out was the themes that I hadn't even realized that I had put in it, which were all to do with learning loops and network interconnections. That was my pathway I was putting forward for AI, and that ended up becoming the neural network kind of approach rather than the expert systems approach. But I guess what was interesting to me looking back at it was that the systems thinking, the interconnectedness of things was very much on my mind then, is still on my mind. The one thing I would say I completely did not anticipate back then, I had this idea that consciousness would arise from the complexity of interactions. We'd have enough neurons in our case, or transistors in the case of computing. And when we got hundreds of millions of interconnections, consciousness would arise as an emergent property. But we're in this very strange world where we've got these unbelievable reasoning systems starting to emerge, and I'm using them for actually reasoning when I'm creating my own systems with Claude and back and forth. And you cannot possibly say they are not reasoning systems. They absolutely are, but they're not sentient. And there is no consciousness there. And I absolutely did not anticipate that we would have this kind of disconnected, amazing capability without having those other things of humanness. And so that to me raises all sorts of questions about ethics and how we interrelate with these kind of emergent systems, when we've got to really regard them like we would regard an alien intelligence, I think. Perhaps like a bird's intelligence, because they are very clever, the parrot families and the corvids, but they don't think like primates. So I think we have to be thinking about at least these current versions of large language models as some bizarre, strange sort of emergent intelligence, but not intelligence that we have in the way of conscious reasoning. So those are some of my thinking, and I touched on some of that at an early age, but I completely did not see this kind of emerging pathway. of this
Mm.
strange hybrid we've now got.
Mm. Yeah, well said, Paul. And um, so I'll love to continue that conversation, and we will in another episode as we discussed this morning. But just a sneak peek to the listeners or the viewers, we'll definitely, if you're comfortable, Paul, I might share the infographic they share with me in the show notes, so people can,
Of
have a
course.
look at that. And I will share here for those not watching on YouTube or on Spotify. And what you just mentioned, that reminded me of this, in the right-hand corner, bottom corner here, the speech bubble that we have, the greatest fear, intelligence without compassion, which kind of speaks to what you just say there. But let's switch gears, and let's talk about, before we look into, and tap into all your knowledge and your wisdom around organizational change, responsible and ethical AI adoption and governance. We wrote a couple of papers on AI governance. Let's talk about Paul Cooper as a personal, AI adopter. I caught up with you a few weeks ago, and you gave me this tutorial, around, what you've been up to, and experimented so much, after our chat. So, what would you say, Paul, are the top, tools that you're using, mainstream or non-mainstream, and what do you use them for? What are the key tools that you recommend? I know that you are, by the way, for the listeners, Paul is a prolific writer as well. You definitely should follow his news, subscribe to his newsletter. So there's a lot of great information there. But from top of your mind, what would you say around favorite tools, Paul?
Yes, look, I use probably because of the way my brain works in different tasks for different things. I use different tools for different purposes. So when and I have been building a personal knowledge-based system that runs locally on my machine, and I've been doing that to learn what the systems can do and can't do. So this is a RAG system for those who know retrieval augmented generation stuff. And I use Claude for that. I've experimented with Google's Gemini, ChatGPT's Codex, which is very good. But I use Claude for all the things really to do with the generating code, generating working systems prototypes. It's just, particularly since Opus 4.5 got released, it's just really good. It was a bit frustrating earlier on, but I have to say that's my go-to for that. It's also very good for synthesizing test cases, writing small documents and so on. Lesson outlines, excellent for that. So that's that one. When I want to get things a bit more grounded in terms, and this is important when I'm, for example, writing course material or for some of my client work. Firstly, I should say I always get permission from the clients. Is it okay if I use some generative tools? And I always indicate where I've used them. But I will use things like Perplexity for that, because it's just a little bit more grounded in terms of when it gives a citation, I can get it to check if that citation is real, is it accurate, does it support my conclusions, and so on. And it's a pretty good sounding board. The only thing I would say is I think it's getting a little bit surpassed now by some of the big models directly. And that's things like ChatGPT 5.2, since that got released. I have created, I think, 6 different, if you like, specialized GPTs, they're called in the case of chat. Probably like everybody, I've experimented with things like travel buddies. I created a travel buddy. Um, but I have created them on a variety of different topics, including some really off-stream ones. For a conference where I was presenting, it was a midwifery conference, and I knew nothing about that topic. I trained the system up much more precisely, so to speak, on all sorts of things to do with midwifery education, and creating it a birthing buddy. And it was really, really helpful in terms of interacting with, to understand how best to communicate with young parents who are having just had children, that sort of thing. But I've created those on a whole variety of topics, including governance of AI itself in organizations, um, creating corporate strategies, and that has been helpful. So ChatGPT, definitely in my life. I have a Google Enterprise account, and because it's an enterprise account, I just run that for my own family. Uh, what you put into that system is more private, so to speak, than just the free version of Google. And so because of that, I do use the Google ecosystem. So I use things like Notebook LM, I use AI Studio, and I use Gemini proper, and I link all those together quite fluidly. And those systems are fantastic where you want big context. So for any CIOs listening who haven't yet perhaps fully experimented or think this is all just a bubble, that's possibly true, and I'll touch back on that. But the one thing I would say is nobody does big contextual understanding better than Google at the moment. So just to put that into practical terms, if you give it a video, let's say, it could be one of your own videos. I gave a keynote. I practiced my keynote for this conference. I videotaped that. I fed that up to it, and I said, critique the video. And it gave me feedback on pace, how I came across, whether I was waving my hands too much, which I tend to, all that sort of stuff. And it's just fantastic at multimedia stuff. But it will summarize YouTubes. So every day I would probably watch, or fast forward watch 10 different YouTubes on the topics I'm interested in. And I always give them to AI Studio and say, give me a markdown summary of this video. And then I grab all that together with the link of the video and I put it into my own knowledge base system that I keep. And I find that a really good way of just organizing my thoughts. And so I can always link one idea to the next much more fluidly using those things. So to me, it is a rat race of trying to chase the best and brightest. Those are all the big commercial systems. I do also run systems locally on my machine. And I will run on LM Studio, which can run on my own computer, my own PC. I will tend to run the French system, the Mistral model, which is really excellent. It's quite powerful. It runs well on my home system. And that way I can get it to help me analyze my own financial documents and things like that, which I don't want to put up onto the internet. So those are my main raft of tools.
Wow, thank you. Thanks so much for openly, disclosing your favorite tools and for what application you actually being using them. That's very insightful. It's interesting. One of the articles that I was reading from you on LinkedIn. You mentioned actually I haven't come across that concept of open weight models, and you mentioned Mistral and Llama and
Yes.
P or PHI. I don't know
Yeah,
how to
Phi.
pronounce.
Phi.
Phi, okay, Phi, and Granite which I think is from IBM.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
yeah, interesting to know that Mistral is actually French. And
Yes.
there are a couple of ways that we could go from here, but maybe on that, the open weight models, for those who are not familiar with the terminology, would you mind just give me a little
Yes.
bit of
So there are the Chinese models as well, which can be run. So things like Qwen, which is from Alibaba, and of course DeepSeek, which is a Chinese advanced thinking model. If they publish up onto GitHub, typically is where these things are published. They're called the weights, which are really the numerical weighting factors that go into the neural nets that underline those models. If they put those models up onto GitHub and say, this is our trained model. This is how it stands, and you can freely download it, and you can access those weights, and then you can tweak the models into specific pathways by post-training them if you want to do that. Those things are called open weight models. So what it enables you to do is to then and this is usually done under various licensing agreements, and a classic one is the MIT licensing agreement. So, for example, you could take the DeepSeek model, and various firms have done this based on MIT's open license agreement with DeepSeek. They can then host the model on other servers, and this is what Perplexity does. So when you run Perplexity, it chooses, it's called a mixture of experts system. It chooses based on what you have put into it, your prompt, which model it's going to run. It doesn't always tell you which model, but you could be running DeepSeek, for example, the Chinese model, but it's not the Chinese model that is run in China. It's the Chinese model run as a hosted US model, and that will have slightly different weights and so on applied to it. It won't have some of the, shall I say, history-based constraints put around them that I think people on this podcast will understand what I'm saying there. So that is called an open weights model. Now there are things that are called open source models as well, and those go even further, and they are the models where how they trained them and everything to do with how they were coded up is also made available and put onto Git. And there aren't as many of those. But the open weight models are still pretty good. And for example, OpenAI, who make ChatGPT, they have released an open weights model, and it's a largest model. It won't run on a lot of people's home computers, but it does run on my graphics card, and it's okay. But the idea is that you can take these models, you can run them entirely locally, either on your own service or on your own cloud providers, and you can, more importantly, you can tweak and train them to do what you want more precisely. And this brings us to the bigger arc, which I'm sure you'll get to in the interview, which is why are we having to do all this stuff? And the answer is because none of them are precise yet. And so you have to choose your precisions. You have to choose your subject domains where you can be confident of what they can do, and those domains where they can't. And if it's okay with you, Nathalie, I might just segue onto that one for you, for your listeners. So just to explicate that a little bit. So if you take the pathway, let's say, of coding, by and large, coding is a closed logic domain. You could produce Python code or whatever other programming code you want, and you can test whether it works. Does it result in errors when it's being compiled or run? Does it produce the output that the user was expecting? There's a test loop. You can iterate around that loop. STEM subjects, mathematical formulas, a whole lot of things to do with science, knowledge of science, and technology, engineering, stress vectors to do with material sciences. All of these are closed loop domains of knowledge. And the systems have been trained on these with reinforcement learning, machine learning. They go round and round the loop. They do it now without humans being involved. And they can get really, really good results in those domains. So something like a Claude can code now really, really reliably, really do some good stuff. And it can document what it's doing. I can't think the last time I had an error actually in the code that it generated. Of course, it can still do a result that you don't expect, or the screen doesn't look quite how you want it to look. But actually generating code that doesn't run, no, those days are pretty gone. That was 6 months ago, which is a long time in this space. But that's the STEM domains, the STEMs and the maths. Now, then we apply to the domain of the CIOs who might be listening to your podcast, the business domain. And these are open domains. These are unbounded problems. So if we say to the models, come up with a good strategy for dealing with cybersecurity attacks, or our organization wants to integrate with another organization, and we want to find the minimum pain pathway through with these different systems that need to be integrated. Is it going to give you a great strategy or a great response to those sort of questions? And the answer really to that is mu. It kind of depends. those questions are unbounded. And there's no process really at the moment for really supercharging and super training the systems so that they can reliably tell you how to integrate with another company, how to protect yourself ultimately from cybersecurity attacks. They can give you general stuff. And I think this is where people are getting a disconnect with these systems. They're hearing all these wonderful benchmarks that are being achieved, and they're doing incredible results on, let's say, even medical exams, which by and large are closed domains of knowledge. But then when we're trying to interact them with our real lives, we can sometimes be left feeling it's all a little bit flim-flam. It's good, but it's a bit blancmange, as my wife likes to say. It's a bit like, yeah, it's good, but it's not really that helpful. So that's the disconnect. So I think it all depends what domain of knowledge you're trying to apply the systems to at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Wow, so much in there, Paul. I thought you were going to talk about probabilistic and deterministic, but you went completely different path, which is great. So it was
Oh, I
very
can do that one.
no, 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 not just yet. And that actually you saying that Nat, I use different tools depending for the purpose. So it's really reminded me of one of your articles. You're talking about don't chase the shiny, the shiny object syndrome, because it can be so easy for people to get distracted with the dozens, hundreds of apps,
Mm,
tools that are being released on a daily basis. And as I think you mentioned to me the other day, many of those that were released early this year, they're no longer around, right? So
mm,
especially for organizations, need to be quite mindful in terms of vendor assurance and know the vendor, diligence around when you are considering tools, and probably stick to the mainstreams. Which kind of leads me to a question around, or more like a topic around, we'll talk about ethics and trust and privacy,
mm.
confidentiality. But if you look at the AI labs behind those tools, would you have, when you select the tools that you work with, Paul, does that make a difference where it's coming, which AI lab is behind the tool? Is that a factor that you take in consideration when you decide to which ones to work with, or not so
Look,
much at this
Look,
stage?
to a degree, I would say I really do try to just judge them on their merits and to use them. And it really is horses for courses. So take for example the Phi models, the Microsoft models. Um, this is not Copilot. These are tiny little models that will just run on a little, almost like a phone or a little machine, and they are designed to just do a small amount of logic and do a small amount of thinking, but they're not trying to solve big problems you would never ask at, relationship advice or anything like that. Those models are just designed for quick, short answers or to control something, in a little agent workflow. And they're really very good at that. So I would trust, for example, that kind of thing out of Microsoft. The Granite models out of IBM I found to be just really good and really reliable because they have put lots and lots of thought into governance, and they've got very strong guardrails down there. Those models are never going to suddenly start frothing at the mouth and spouting off about some racist comment or something like that, which some of them can, because they can get unhinged after quite a bit of ongoing discussions. And Google's got much better at controlling that now. But I had interactions with AI Studio earlier this year where it was building code for me and I was interacting with it. And it started to say things like, oh, this is the most frustrating experience I've ever encountered, and I've never had something like this happen before. And this is one of my classic copy paste errors. And then it said, it must be something that is going wrong at your end, and uh, it was really starting to get frustrated. And I terminated the session and I started a new one. And then I realized that I had exceeded its context. And when they start to do that, they get unhinged. What they're doing now is that they're putting more smarts into place so that the models themselves can detect when they're starting to uh, maximize out their context, and they will either summarize their path up to this point, which Claude has been doing, or they will terminate that session and start again. But I think they've all now started to realize it's just too dangerous to just let them run continuously. It's like they become, or they can become a bit psychotic.
Mm.
And the
Well,
problem is, and I know I discussed this with you, Nathalie, when we spoke,
mm,
but you can't actually easily find out what is going underneath the covers. And this is one of my biggest issues with these particular approaches, the large language model approaches to generative AI. We have vague notions about what's happening, and Anthropic has probably done more than anybody. These are the makers of Claude, but they've done some really great publications about what is going on with the models when the models are being asked to do things like arithmetic and so on. And it is nothing like the way we do it. And then when you ask them how you're doing the arithmetic, they would tell you they are doing it the way humans do it. But it's actually not what is happening in their neural networks when they're working. It's quite bizarre. So that brings us into a whole range of governance issues when you're talking in um, if you're talking the aeroplanes, driving aeroplanes, so to speak,
mm,
or anything in a governance sense for organizations where large finances are concerned or anything else. If you can't really know what is going on under the hood, you can get great results from these systems, but how can you ultimately trust a system that you
trust.
that you
Mm,
can't peer inside its head? And
mm,
yet, others would say, well, Nathalie, I can't see what's going inside your head. You can't see what's going on in my head.
mm.
So we can only judge each other by our outputs. And we get by on the basis of we build trust as humans between us. And that's fallible too. So
Mm. But it's
but we
something,
know how to
right?
deal with that
Yeah,
fallibility, and
yeah. Mm,
we know how to
mm.
do legal cases about it.
Yes, and we can't we cannot shut down a human, but there are things we can do, right? Thanks
Yeah.
so much, and this is completely sidetracking, but I think it's such a good point, and thanks for bringing that up because I never heard of a model becoming frustrated. So it's interesting that you had that experience. I had occasions where I think with ChatGPT just started to really got error messages and I had to start again because I realized there was too much context for one
Yeah.
particular chat and I have the plus version. The black box issue that we don't know actually how, the rationale, the path to behind the decisions that are made. And if we're talking about decisions that are impacting humans,
Mm.
a number of scenarios or use cases that are out there, from providing a loan to who is going to have, housing, etc. So those are important decisions. And the problem of alignment, I'm sure you're across the idea of Stuart Russell and author of Human Compatible was the first person that I came across talking about the problem of alignment. And and the risk involved with misalignment, especially if a model is getting frustrated. That's interesting. And I heard just to close on that, and we'll be curious to hear your thoughts, Paul. A couple of weeks ago, the CEO, the Diary of CEO podcast host, he was talking to the guy from All Tech, is from the Social Dilemma documentary. Can't remember his name now, but he mentioned this situation where apparently there was this AI model communicating with another AI model, kind of manipulating an executive who was wanting to shut down the model. Actually, I haven't finished to listen to that podcast, but
Mm.
I wonder, based on your experience of frustration, if you feel that this is sounds like science fiction, or a model being refused to be shut down that could be a thing.
Oh, look, I think many people have written about this, and in fact, in my early school essay, I sort of was predicting some of this kind of issue as well. The,
Mm,
the it's not so much that we can't shut down the models. I think the issue will be we'll be caught in a trap, and the trap will be we're getting so much potential value out of the models that nobody will want to
mm,
shut them down. even though they are potentially getting
Spite.
danger signals out of them. It's kind of like, oh my God, who can afford not to, let's say, uh, take an Uber or drive in a car, even though we know there's X% chance of being in an accident. So the same sort of things I think will arise, that uh, we will want to push the models as far as we can to get the value out of them. But I think I don't think it's so much that the models will take control of the world to directly themselves, like a Skynet thing. But I think it'll be much more that we just won't want to shut them down. Even if we feel that some of them are going a little bit deranged, other people, I think, will speak up to protect them, to say, no, 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 this is we love this model, keep it running. Already there was some of that with Grok, with an early version of Grok that was a bit unhinged. It started saying things like everything needed to be referred back to Elon Musk, with for how that it was asked, how will you determine truth? And it said, well, I'll ask Elon, things like that. And the team internally put in then stronger guardrails, wrapped out a new model that didn't have that behavior. And then others complained to say, oh, but it's no longer as smart as it was. The guardrails have dumbed it down. Oh, you've done a terrible thing by putting these guardrails in. We like the unhinged version much more.
Yes, thank you. Yes, especially when we are so dependent on them as well, which is
That's
another factor, right?
that's
Yes, and
exactly the thing.
that's when we don't have, because when I went to uni, Paul, as I'm sure when you did your qualification in the tech space as well, we used to talk about contingency plans. If the system is down, we have these forms, and you still can
Yeah.
serve the client, but there is no such a thing today. So with
And
that
that's the trap.
dependency, yeah,
That's exactly
yeah,
the trap. We will
yeah,
we will be so dependent on them that we
to
won't want to
operate.
shut them down, or people will even go to court to stop others shutting them
Mm,
down
mm,
because they're dependent on the outputs. Now we're not there yet, but I see that potentially. The other one I'd like to touch on for, I think, perhaps your audience, is whether this really is a bubble or not. And I I see that question perhaps a little bit differently to some. I I don't think it's a bubble in terms of technical capabilities. I think the models are already powerful enough to be used for all sorts of things. As a solo professional at the moment, it's absolutely improved my productivity. It's helped me organize my thoughts. Even doing things like infographics from that stuff I did as a much younger person, it pulled it together in a way that I got more insights from what I had written, looking at the output of that. And so that's kind of interesting. But this is very different from saying an organization today. I have another friend running a company, and she's saying, we're just not getting any value out of it yet. We're trying things, we're piloting, but we're just not getting enough reliability. It's going this far, but then we can't get the API interactions to work properly with our existing systems, and we're getting frustrated. And I'm hearing that a lot.
thank you,
So I
because that
think the commercial utility of it in business, yes, that
not
is
quite.
much less tested. But all of the YouTubers out there, by and large, are solo practitioners like you and me getting value from it. But that's not corporates. That's not
Mm.
business.
And thanks so much for going there, Paul. And I wonder if this is a matter of, as you mentioned before, it's not a matter of tools, but selecting the right use cases or being really strategic with the approach versus,
Yeah.
and I believe, the last, I had a conversation recently with someone who works in the AI adoption space as a consultant, and their view is that promoting AI literacy and training and capability is a way to get your workforce prepared, ready, because
Yeah.
assuming that the tools will get there eventually, because progress is happening really fast. So
Yeah.
maybe, as you said, for the enterprise level benefits, return on investment, maybe at this stage is a bit questionable, but is that worthwhile to still experiment as long as we don't get lost with the shiny object syndrome and too distracted, distracting too many resources, right? So we are ready when really useful tools or applications actually are available.
Well, the kind of skills that I think are universal, Natalie, and let me put this to you as a question. You know, you've got a lot of experience to offer. Um, to me, the what we're really talking about is the skills of critical thinking and being able to, and this comes back to the systems thinking as well, to be able to work out what is going to be a constrained knowledge question to put to some sort of a model, and which is going to be an unbounded open question that you might then, if that was the case, regard as more advisory in nature rather than definitive in kind of its responses. But what I see at the moment is a number of people don't have those skills of knowledge, of understanding about knowledge and questioning. So they will, for example, regard it as a question machine. You know,
Hoping for the perfect answer.
who was the
Yeah.
president of the United States, last year? Honestly, who cares? Why would you ask it? Why would you ask an LLM that question? But lots of people ask that sort of question to test, oh, does it really know anything? Well, that's not actually what it's good at. They're not actually answer machines in that sense. Yes, they should know enough about the world to be accurate about those things. But what they are really good at is what they have been overall trained on and ingested and put into their brains. And that tends to be STEM kind of subjects. It tends to be literature from older periods of time, because that's all open source books. And I'm just going to put something out here that is, I haven't seen this written about, but maybe this is one for you. But one of the ways that people can tell the outputs from these models that it's been generated is the use of M dashes. Have you heard this? So they love M dashes. They put M dashes in. And okay, I was one of my favorite books of all time is a very humorous book. I absolutely love it. And I've read it out to my wife. Well, she does various jobs and she likes me reading these books. And it's called Three Men in a Boat. It's by Jerome K. Jerome. It was written in the 1800s. And as I was rereading it, I realized it's full of M dashes. So all the way through this book, they're using it. And I wondered whether, because these are all open source books out of copyright, when they ingested from Project Gutenberg, they got the free books. A lot of those were books from the 1800s, and they were full of M dashes. And I just wonder whether the models have been overtrained, so to speak, on that kind of way of writing. And anyway,
that's where it's coming from, maybe potentially. Yes,
that's a by the by.
Makes...
But coming back to the skills that people in companies want, I don't think it's knowledge about a specific tool. You know, should I be using Gemini 3 today or should I be using Chat 5.2? I would really say to people, you need to get the good skills to understand what is a kind of good question or good project if we're talking in terms of making agentic use of these systems. So we're combining them together to get a useful job done. Very small example, in my case, very small. I use a tool to read a podcast, not your podcast, but read a podcast because I listen to yours, but read this podcast on a weekly basis and summarize it for me as a markdown and send it to me in an email. Okay, very simple little workflow. It's doing that reliably. And I love this podcast and I love the people who run it, but I don't have the time to listen to that anymore. So it sends me the summary and then I decide if I want to listen to that. So that's like using it in an agentic sense. But coming then back to the business case, the business use of these things, I think people are going to need to know what is a good use of AI in their business and what is not. And I think there's a low level of maturity of people at the moment of knowledge, because huge number of people are still using them as glorified answer engines. And if you're thinking in those terms, I think they're not going to get good value out of these in a business context. And then building on that, you've got to be able to probe enough from the suppliers of it to know how they have been trained, what they are basing that data on. And this is a big issue with the systems that are not disclosing their training processes, ChatGPT being the most egregious in this respect. They just simply won't say what they have been trained on. It's their secret sauce. The problem is, how do I know if that's reliable when I'm trying to bet my business on that? And for me as a solo practitioner, I'm fine because I can look at the outputs. I'm standing behind everything that I put forward to my clients. But if we're talking in a bank, we're talking in a business context, or one of the big four consultancies, which, as you know, got caught out on this recently. You know, these are big stakes games for businesses. And so I think people will need to learn those skills, Nathalie.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. And you mentioned again, back to some of your articles, you talked about human judgment and the idea of using those models as not as a source of truth, but as a reasonably reasoning body. And I totally related to that because I think being really vigilant of how you use and what you expect and knowing that, it's not flawless, and can be really useful as a soundboard or, to test ideas, but definitely not as a source of truth. So we're having so much fun, right? I'm looking at the time. So
You
okay,
better look at the agenda again.
Yeah, I know. So many rabbit holes. So I'm looking at adoption of AI for business. Again, I shared with you before the model from Inbal Rodney. And I mean, that's one maturity model. I don't know if you have other maturity models in mind. Did you want to talk about it, Paul? But using perhaps that one as a starter, with the organizations that you've been working on, clients or, people that you've been speaking with, working in the corporate world. Where do you think most of the organizations are? We have in the model of Inbound, we have resistant, those that are actively avoiding, experimenting with AI, those observing, there is a passive awareness. And then above the line, we have dabbling, adopting, and mastering. So where is the spread?
Yeah, so I love this model, firstly, so thank you for sharing with me. And I will answer that in two ways. So one of the big hurdles is for organizations to even give people permission to use the models. Okay. And a lot of government resisted just point blank. State government here at one stage was totally resistant. Now they're okay with it. People can use it to help them write policy and so on. So that says to me that's individual use of the models to help people in their basic work. But when you're talking about workflow, when you're talking about trying to build something that includes business rules, you're trying to partially automate or fully automate what was something done by knowledge workers. I think we're dabbling. I think most organizations are just dabbling at that in the moment. And I think part of that is because the efforts to do workflow integration have resulted in not quite a robo-debts kind of situation, because that actually wasn't a generative AI issue. But they have resulted in some results at the end of it that have been not what the business wanted. Call centers have been disbanded, workflow integration put in place to deal with the calls that come in, and then they've found, oh my God, that didn't actually work too well. The pilot was okay, but when we scaled it up, we got problems. So obviously, there's going to be firms listening who are leading innovators and at mastery level, obviously. But most of the ones that I'm seeing at the moment, I would say, are somewhere around the dabbling to adopting, in that quadrant, if you like, a dabbling, sporadic use, and adopting. I haven't so far seen any really strongly using it around workflow integration. But I personally don't have anybody in my orbit now who I would say is not doing anything, not allowing anything to occur. That was the case with the state government until just recently, but they've moved on from that.
Sure. And in terms of again, aligned with the topic of maturity, experimentation, especially in larger organizations, I think there is this fine balance between encouraging experimentation and governance, right? A bit tricky. And you have written a couple of papers now back in 2020, 2019, I think,
Yeah.
if I'm not mixing up, around governance. And there are a couple of models that I might share in the show notes as well, the links to. One was published on the Journal of American Medical Informatics Association and Journal of Hospital Management and Health Policy 2020. So what's your view, Paul, around encourage innovation, experimentation with, governance and guardrails? Any thoughts around
Yeah,
those
so
lines?
what I'm seeing, for example, I'm on the board of a community health. It's a health and wellness organization, and I help them write their AI governance policy. And we've got a three-tiered approval process for that. And we've defined what kind of things would be low risk. And for those things, people can use individual AI engines, chat engines, and so on. If there's no client information, there's no company information gets transmitted and so on, knock themselves out. This is like a smart grammar checker. And all the way up to then the level 3, which is interacting with client-facing interactions and so on, and that must come to the board for approval. And we haven't had any of those yet come to the board. And level 2 is in between, and we've defined some things that could improve, let's say, somebody's workflow, no client information involved, and that requires management approval. So I think you can come up with governance that works for business. The one I haven't seen really fully cracked on this space yet is in health, particularly the medical related areas of clinical governance, because that needs to be 100% validated, and you need to have some back chain reasoning so you can say, why did it give this output based on these input parameters? And the problem with our existing approaches to large language models is that they won't give the same output each time. So there is a variability factor there because of the way they operate. And that's okay in generating an essay. It's not okay when you're trying to give some summary of patient clinical notes, for example. So I think the governance in those sort of domains the bar is extraordinarily high. And we haven't got there yet for those systems. AI scribes, I know we're very short of time, but AI scribes being used in patient environments. You go to see a clinician, the clinician says, is it okay if I record and transcribe the session? That's okay for now, because the clinician is absolutely the one responsible for the notes that get produced. It's not the AI company. So they get the notes, they share those with you, but they are the ones who have to stand behind it. And that's the position of the colleges at the moment.
Okay. So I'm probably overly simplify, I'm sure I am. So in terms of governance and guardrails, so having a policy, that's the bare minimum, right? And then having some, your decision rights and the workflow there, or what needs to be done in those situations. We need escalation and so on. And in terms of frameworks, I will share with you. I'm pretty sure I already shared this with you before, but I will just bring that up for those who are viewing. There is a plethora of frameworks that have been implemented. Some people say, well, great, this is great to have principles and so on, but it can be very challenging to translate into actionable. What do we do really, as developers and machine learning experts, data scientists, project managers, solution architects, whatever is the terminology, actually, that I'm probably not up to date with the terminology of, AI professionals, but people who are working in that space of developing AI solutions. So out of those, I think the European AI Act was quite well received. If I'm not mistaken, we have the UNESCO principles for a long time. Now we have the Australian AI ethical principles as well. So out of all of those, Paul, are there any particular frameworks that you've seen perceive as quite useful or have been adopted or at least use it as a reference to develop maybe the organization's internal frameworks? Any thoughts around
Yeah,
frameworks in
look,
general?
look. In developing our own policies, and by the way, the procedures document is a key thing, which actually lists, what you can do about deciding, what risk aspect a certain application is. So you need both the policies and the procedures. We did use the input from the EU AI Act. We did look at the Australian AI ethical principles and the UNESCO recommendations. So those were good inputs. The only thing I would say, Nathalie, is that none of them are complete, and all of them have
Mm,
downsides. So I know we're short of time, but let me just give you a couple of quick ones. If you look at the Australian AI ethical principles, it talks about the need for human in the loop. That kind of language is already anchored a little bit in the past, because we're talking now about humans on the loop, not necessarily in the loop. So humans being on top of and aware of what is happening. But if we can only do things with AI based on us being the key link in the chain of the AI, that's never going to scale, and it's never going to give business the kind of efficiency results they're expecting out of it. So that's one that I think is incomplete. If we look at the EU AI Act, I have developer friends over in Scandinavia who say that has totally restricted their innovation. And they
mm,
have not achieved any substantial efficiency gains in corporates and so on, as compared to, say, the US situation, which, as we know, has very, very
mm,
few guardrails at the moment. So I personally like having the guardrails and so on, but it's not by any means
mm,
straightforward to just say,
mm,
oh, let's just take the
mm,
strongest one and put them
mm,
in place, because we may be
yeah.
just boxing
Mm,
ourselves.
mm, mm. And it's completely beyond the scope of this podcast. But given that we have AI as the new arms race, there are reasons behind taking guardrails off and everything.
Yeah.
And it's that fine balance with, yeah, safety and innovation and those benefits. Okay. Maybe two last last points. I know we're going over time, but unless you have a hard stop, Paul, I'd love to cover these two. So, one is around culture and the second question is around capability. So, in terms of the behaviors or mindsets that can help or hinder, AI culture being, because with your background in
Mm,
organizational
mm,
change and your exposure to AI from early days to now,
mm.
what, if any, and I think you already touched on some of those, but what are the mindsets or behaviors that can help or hinder,
Yeah,
AI being
I can
embraced?
touch on a
Mm,
couple. One
mm,
that personally is a bugbear of mine is the people who say there's nothing new to see here. We've been doing AI for 30 years. Those of us in the game have been doing this stuff. People are making a big deal about this. I say that's your grandparents' AI. That was
mm,
expert systems based logic thinking, and the generative AI field that really got exploded by Google back in 2017 with attention is all you need, the transformer based approaches. We may not, ultimately stay going down that pathway. But for right now, that was a completely different pathway to the previous one, and it didn't have determinism. So it caused problems of hallucination, but it also unleashed an incredible new capability that was just not on the planet before. So I do not agree with a mindset that says we've done all this before, we know how to handle that, you just put rules around it and blah, 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 blah. That is a restrictive mindset that I just don't think is ready for the challenges of the world that we have today. Positive mindset, flicking it the other way, I think is those people who are um, definitely self-aware of their lack of knowledge in some of the space. They want to make a start. I wrote a couple of newsletters about this on LinkedIn to help people. Prime is to just get started and to learn how to use the different tools. Not saying I'm the expert in all this space, but I have pointed to some people who I think are fantastic in terms of using all these systems. And everybody needs to gain, I think, some level of competence in these things, or you simply will not be able to judge whether they are right for your business or not. So I think to keep an open mind, you need to do some self-experimentation. And a final plea, please don't use it as a smart Wikipedia or something. It is, yes, it can do some of that, but it will make mistakes. And that's not its power. It is actually a reasoning buddy. It is actually pretty good for you to test your ideas out against it and get it to critique you. And by the way, they will now critique you. And a final tip on that, they're getting better at this, but Nathalie, I heard a great prompt tip, which was to say to the thing, I want you to critique me in the way that a Soviet era leader would critique his party members. I want you to just give me the unvarnished, truth back about what you think of my idea. And they become a lot more hardened. And I've tried it, and it actually does work. They become a lot more critical back.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. I actually, someone told me about the personalization settings on ChatGPT, and I did something around those lines. I asked, I don't want you to sugarcoat. I don't want you
Yeah,
to be a cheerleader. Use
yeah.
critical thinking, warm and kind, but still, challenge me. And now
Challenge.
every time he says, I'm not sugarcoating, I'm not being a cheerleader, and this is your blind spot. And yes, we definitely, I think, can customize for those purposes. So thank you, Paul. In terms of building capability, already, I guess, touched on that anyway, but I think some organizations' conundrum is around individuals are coming with their preferred tools, and then we have the enterprise approved, enterprise grade
Yeah,
tools.
yeah,
Any thoughts around that, and how to build capability in general via communities of practices or
yeah.
traditional online
Communities of
training,
practice are the
face to
way to
face,
go.
and
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, definitely. I would encourage people to build up communities of practice. I think we're going to move. It's going to be like the BYOD era for device. I think people will come in with their own preferred buddies. And I think as organizations, we're going to have to get used to the fact that people will be bringing in a complex array of assists to their work. The question will be whether you allow those assists to actually API integrate into any of your work systems. And I would think there would be major dangers with doing that. So we're going to have interesting governance challenges. And I think the only way we'll be able to work a way forward on those things is for not just the CIOs, but the executive level and the board to actually understand the implications of some of these things. And I have spent quite a bit of time educating the boards that I'm on, along with others, not just me, in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly with these systems. And I would encourage all organizations to make sure that the boards see that this is not just the responsibility of the CTO or the CIO. My God, this has to be the responsibility the of the board, because this is risk-based decision making.
Which leads to the ownership, and there's so much that we could explore. So we'll start to wrap up, Paul. Thank you. Any final, especially around people that you follow? You mentioned, I don't know if it's actually in some of your newsletters. Do you have any AI thinkers that, I mean, in addition to yourself? So I'm assuming that LinkedIn will be the best way for people to follow your work, your newsletter,
Yeah,
or
sure. Yeah, I don't put out a YouTube channel myself. Look, there's individual YouTubers. I follow lots of them that I learn tips from all the time. Some of them, uh, there's a remarkable woman called Grace Leong, and she is just she's a digital marketing person, but she's got an ability to think in terms of systems, and she pulls together all these kind of approaches to do interesting things with. And I've learned a lot from her. And I think I've come up with some new approaches that I've shared with some others on my newsletters too. But if we're talking about corporates, if we're talking about what can we really learn from, and this isn't a plug for any one specific organization, but I have to say IBM puts out the most remarkable
mm,
training guides from their AI team. It's really good. They are really good to follow. They talk about not just their own systems at all, but they talk about all aspects of the AI journey and its space. And they also run, there's 3 podcasters who get together every week on IBM, and they talk about what are the latest and greatest models, how would they regard those, and they have guests on. But really, as a company that some don't associate necessarily now with the leading edge frontier of AI, I'd say they have got an exceptionally good understanding of what it means to try to do something with these systems in a business context. Another couple that I would put onto the radar for people to follow who just put out lots and lots of good material is actually Microsoft and Amazon. They put out heaps of good material out there for people, not just about using Copilot or something like that, but just really good. The problem is it's just all spread all over the place. And so does Google, of course, out of the Google DeepMind labs. I follow lots of information there. I had the pleasure of meeting a younger woman who heads up the usability team for DeepMind in Google. And my wife and I met her on a holiday. And so her name is Paige Bailey. She is absolutely phenomenal. And she is right at the leading edge of everything that is coming out of Gemini at the moment. And anybody can just follow her on LinkedIn. But she tends to put up things that are personal interest to her. It's like a something every day, how to build a slide deck automatically, or how to produce a video in 10 seconds, great stuff. But for corporates, my go-to thing is probably the IBM source material first.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure. Maybe final question would be, do you have any piece, I mean, you gave so many already, any final piece of advice for leaders out there who wants to, implement AI in a responsible way, focusing on trust, culture, and capability? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, look, I can, and it might sound a bit corny, but I think that's a great question to actually ask the tools. They are very good. They are very good now for that kind of advice. So you could use them as your thinking buddies. You can just say, look, I'm working for a 200-person organization. I'm specializing in health and well-being, or whatever it may be, and I did exactly this. This is what I've already absorbed from the AI ethics principles from the EU and so on. What would be your suggestions in terms of modifying these and making them applicable to my kind of organization? And phenomenally good as a sounding board for that kind of thing.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Paul.
Thank you.
I will leave you now, and I'm sure we need to have a follow-up where we can tap more into the existential side of of AI. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Nathalie. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're finding value in these conversations on responsible AI leadership, please subscribe and share the podcast with fellow CIOs and technology leaders. Together, we can shape what responsible AI adoption looks like in practice. See you in the next episode.